What's up guys, Matt here coming at you with another retro deck profile. Today we're going to look at Peter Nguyen's Formula Monarch deck from YCS Providence in the March 2011 format. Before we get into the list, we'll talk a little bit more about what time and what was going on in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Of course, we still have priority during this time period, but this is probably the healthiest point at March 2011's lifespan. There was a couple different iterations of what was going on, different sets between Anaheim and Orlando that I've talked about before, which were the first two events of the format with the release of Trish in between those. But this one, we had the re-ruling of the Colossal Fighter Armory Arm OTK, and this was the first event after that. So this is probably the reason why most people choose to play YCS Providence format. Typically, you play Nationals format when you play a format that includes the National season. But with that going on and everything like that, that's when TG Hyper Librarian came out, and the format really got kind of warped into decks that really revolved around TG Hyper Librarian, mostly being Tengu Plant, which of course Extreme Victory was a legal set for this event. So we do have Reborn Tengu in the format. There are, in terms of the deck specifics, there are three real versions of this deck. I chose to pick one that's kind of right in the middle. You have a more standard Frog Monarch build that would probably be a better build to play today due to the emergence of Maxx. Maxx was also a relatively recent release, and that came out early in this format, and we kind of didn't really know how to deal with that as a card. So at National Season, Maxx really picked up in popularity. So if you go back and play this format, this is the middle ground in terms of like the special summon build. So there's a Tengu build that is really combo centric. There's the build in the middle, which is this one, which just plays a plant engine. And then there's a build that's on a more control side that would play things like Dark Dust Spirit and more Monarchs and maybe a lad or two. So I decided to pick one that was in the middle to like showcase the potential of both sides. But realistically speaking, something further to the control side would deal with Maxx in a more modern context, because Maxx would be so prevalent in this format. So we'll get right into the list here. We of course have our Monarchs. Like I said, small Monarch package with 3 Caius and 3 copies of Raiza. That's really all we need. It's the best. These are the best Monarchs in the format. No Thestalos. And then again, no other real tribute monsters. This is kind of all we need to go off when we do see those rare Maxx. But Raiza and Caius really good at dealing with Xian, which is a really prevalent card in the format. Six Samurai was a really good deck this format, with Extreme Victory giving them like Xian Squire, which allowed Dojo to be really good. So yeah, we can deal with Xian that way. This deck does have a really good Six Samurai matchup. We have a big water engine. We have the Undine package. This was the first place we would see it outside of Mermails, because Mermails, of course, would utilize this when they came out, but it was utilized here first, mostly to send a bunch of water monsters to combo. The biggest one being Fishborg. This is probably the most important monster in the deck. We only play one because we can continually recur it, and we have a bunch of ways to get to it. He did not side a second copy, but it would not be out of the realm of possibility to side a second copy, because you don't want to rely on this too hard, and if they crow it does really suck. Crow is a very popular side deck card, so it would be possible to side a second copy and probably recommended, but he only opted to play the one. And then we have a couple frogs. We just have 2 copies of Swap Frog. Again, we're not playing like Ronin or anything like that, or Dupe. We're just playing a very small frog package with the 2 Treeborns. Treeborn and Fishborg go together so incredibly well. Fishborg, you have to discard a card if you control a water monster, or like level 3 or lower, and you can summon, you could use it to summon Treeborg, and it has to synchro with a water, so this is kind of where the formula part of the deck comes in. Formula Synchron was yet to be limited, so we had 3 copies of it still, so we play a full 3 copies. We can use that to draw a card, and it's really good. So if you have Treeborn, Fishborg, special summon, both of them make formula, draw a card, and you can sack that off for a Monarch. Or if you're able to get another monster on board, say a Swap Frog or something like that, or you had another monster, then you can go into a level 8. We can get into that when we get into the extra deck. But yeah, this is just a really overall solid engine that allows you to do a whole lot of comboing. Again, you can see where the susceptibility of Maxx comes in. You can chain to this, you can chain to this. That's where that comes in. And this is the point of contention that I was referring to with the plant engine here. So we have, of course, double Lonefire Blossom. This card was not limited yet. It would get limited in September, but we still have 2 copies here. We have the Bulb, Spore, and Dandylion. Lonefire is your only real normal summon. Because you can discard any card to summon Fishborg, you can just use them to fuel your graveyard really easily just by pitching these if you draw them. They're not completely dead draws in this deck, so that's why we really like it. Again, these two are really great uses for one. Plant Engine just provides you with so much utility. We do not play Debris Dragon. This deck has so many normal summons in it with the Monarchs, and then the Undines and things like that. And that's what we really want to use our normal summons on, so we don't play the Debris Dragons. It wouldn't be, like I said, out of the realm to play the Debris Dragon with the Tengu build. The Tengu build, essentially, it swaps out some of the Monarchs, and it just attempts to go as fast as possible and put as many monsters on board. Again, not really good in a modern context. I do see Format Library doing Providence events every once in a while, like smaller tournaments online, and 3 Maxx is pretty standard in those. So again, that build wouldn't do too well, but a standard Formula Monarch deck would be absolutely awesome. Again, Maxx is really good against Samurai as well. So the last few monsters, we have the one Sangan. Some plant decks actually would play 1 copy of Tour Guide just to get Sangan out, to be able to search a lot of the Plant Engine and the Debris Dragons and things like that. I think I've seen Jeff Jones do that. I was watching a couple of videos of duels where we saw Tour Guide and people were reading the card because they didn't know what it did. Actually, on the Extreme Victory promo page, it told people to pick up Tour Guide, which I always thought was pretty interesting, saying for a mechanic that would be coming out later. So we would get Exceeds in August, and then the ban list in September, and then the new plant format. Some hand monsters as well. We have Gorz, Trag, and Battle Fader. In the more standard Monarch builds, you will see more copies of Battle Fader, of course. Trag was still limited to 1. It would go up to 2 on the next ban list, but we were still hanging out with just 1 Tragoedia. And then, of course, the last 2 monsters here are the 2 copies of Effect Veiler. And we will get into the spell lineup. No trap cards, of course. Treeborn Frog, all of that, no need to have any of those cards. The first spell, of course, the most common spell you would see in a deck that utilizes Treeborn Frog and focuses heavily on Treeborn Frog is 3 copies of Enemy Controller. Again, a great way to do the Formula Monarch draw play, make an 8, a Treeborn Frog, tribute it off, get your opponent's monster, bring it back, and then bring back your Fishborg, and then you can continue the play from there. So 3 copies of Enemy Controller. This is very, very standard for builds like this. 1 copy of 1-for-1. We could utilize Effect Veiler if we desperately need it, because so this card is live very, very easily. This is not a difficult card to get off in this deck at all. We have plenty of monsters that we draw that we can just chuck off of this to get into the graveyard. No issues whatsoever. 1 copy of Foolish Burial, one of the greatest -1s in Yu-Gi-Oh history. A great way to just deal with your Plant Engine, put it in the graveyard. You have so much utility with Fishborg and all of those other cards, and the Frogs, the Treeborns, Dandylion, Spore. You have so many great targets for this, so this card is always good. 3 copies of Pot of Avarice. It does suck to brick this card early, but it's so easy to go through it, especially because you can just do the Lonefire for Lonefire play. But 3 copies of Pot of Avarice. This card is nuts in this deck. Of course, it would go to 1 in the next few months on the next list, but 3 copies of Pot of Avarice. Some staple cards, 1 Dark Hole, 1 Monster Reborn, and 1 Giant Trunade. This will be Trunade's last format. We would go back to Heavy Storm in September, so we do have the 1 copy of Trunade left. Heavy Storm not legal. This is a non-heavy format, which is partially to do with, or to how 6 Samurai would be so good. Again, no heavy, we can just no fear set everything, but again, Black Rose was such a relevant card in that format, so it is pointed to take note of Black Rose and things like that. And then, of course, 2 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon, because this card is still at 2. We would get, again, 3 copies in the next ban list, but we do have 2 copies. We do play some interesting side deck cards to play around our only 2 MSTs, because this was still when we had 3 copies of D-Fissure and 3 copies of Macrocosmos, and a lot of decks just didn't need their graveyard. This one especially did, so we definitely need to remove those cards off of the board as quickly as possible. So we kind of have to side deck for that. And we will get into the extra deck here. Again, Formula Monarch, so the obligatory 3 copies of Formula Synchron. This is the half of the namesake of the deck. This card is awesome. Again, draw cards, sync on your opponent's turn. There's no real level 5 in this shenanigans, and then Black Rosing your opponent on their turn. It's pretty difficult to get a level 5 out. There's not a lot of stuff like that because we don't play tank. Normally, you just do like a level 1 tuner and a Tengu, and to make like a Catastor, and then you'd have Formula, and that would be the way to do that. But unfortunately, we have a relatively difficult time, but this is mostly for the draw, and then to make 8s with our Monarchs. 2 copies of Armory Arm. This is not... You need 2 Colossal Fighters, not 2 Armory Arms for the Colossal Fighter at GK now. Armory Arm is just a really good card. We can make it with Swap Frog and Formula, and it's just a really important level 4. Level 4s are really easy to make with like our level 3 Undines and level 1 Tuners. So, easy way to make a 4 and then climb. This is like essentially like a precursor to like Link climbing, where we just have to synchro climb because we can only use water monsters with our Fishborg. So we kind of have to make smaller monsters and then use those monsters to make the bigger monsters. And then everything else I believe is just one ofs. 1 Catastor, it's the best 5 and it's the only 5. For 6s, we have 1 copy of Brionac. Brionac is the best 6 with Goyo being banned. And we also chose to play Gaia Knight. I would actually cut this for another level 8 because he only played Stardust and Scrap. I would probably be playing Colossal Fighter in this format. Again, with Sheehan around, it makes it nice and big. So that's the thing I prefer. For 7s, of course, Black Rose Dragon. And then 1 copy of Ancient Fairy. We didn't have the Dark World Structure deck out, obviously, but we did have Gravekeepers in the format. And Necro Valley can kind of mess this deck up a little bit. So the ability to just use this to get rid of Necro Valley, you can just have a Monarch and any of your level 1 tuners, and you can go into this and you can get rid of Necro Valley that way. Again, the 8s that I mentioned earlier, of course, the 1 Stardust Dragon and the 1 Scrap Dragon. And then for 9s, Trish actually was not limited, but he chose to only play 1 copy. Again, Mist Wurm is really good at preventing like a full boards with the Stardust. Again with the Xian and then all of their Keyzons and things like that. And then yeah, Trish can deal with Stardust, but most Mist Wurm can too with it and other cards on the board. So Mist Wurm really good in that regard. I probably would have played 2 Trish just because I think Trish is so good, especially for the mirror for hitting the graveyard. But I can understand the validity of Mist Wurm. And then the last Synchro monster is 1 copy of Shooting Star Dragon because it is so easy to make Formula. We have so many formulas that we can use. And then again, we've discussed how easy it is to make 8s, but Stardust also being in the format, the fact that we can econ and standby phase, and we can even take our opponent's formulas if they leave it up because you can't chain Formula until the main phase, so you can econ on the standby phase to prevent your opponent from doing it in the mirror. The mirror for this matchup is just absolutely nutty. So, yeah, and we'll get right into the side deck. Let's get into some popular decks of the format here. We, of course, have Tengu Plants. This was probably the best deck and then would definitely be the best deck once we got into National Season. 6 Samurai, a deck that I really enjoy playing this format. It's pretty tricky. I kind of like the Asceticism builds better, but Hand of the 6 Samurai is a cool card, and Gateway is obviously Gateway. TGs, which actually go on to win Nationals, it would probably see a little bit more relevance then, but you could definitely play it in this format. The deck that got second was Infernities. We covered a zombie plant deck earlier in the format as more of a rogue option. Another rogue option, of course, would be Gravekeepers. And then another deck from the top 8, Carl Waite. He would top YCS Columbus as well in September format. So he topped in September and March with Machine of Gadgets. So we'll get into the side deck here. Only 1 copy of Maxx. Again, we haven't quite figured out that Maxx is kind of really freaking good. Along with that, we have our 2 copies of DD Crow. This is really good in the mirror. Being able to hit that Fishborg and those Treeborns, really important. For 6 Samurai, we actually have 3 copies of Puppet Plant. The fact that we can just steal Xian and then tribute it off is really good. So 3 copies of Puppet Plant to deal with that matchup. I talked about earlier about how MST is at 2, so we side deck 2 copies of Breaker, as well as 2 copies of Mobius. And like I said, because Macrocosmos and D-Fish are not the biggest thing, but cards that completely ruin this deck, it's kind of like how decks that could run into Evil Swarms would need to side XYZ Encore because of how prevalent losing that matchup was, even though it wasn't the most common thing. That was the thing we had to do. So again, with these backward removal cards, and you think, well, how could you use Mobius if our opponent is using Macro and Defission, we can't get our Treeborns to the graveyard? Well, we side deck 3 copies of Soul Exchange to just tribute their monsters. We can kind of side into a much more controlled variant of the deck here with our 3 Soul Exchanges and our 2 Mobiuses. And we can take out our Plan Engine, and we are a much more traditional Monarch deck, Formula Monarch, Frog Monarch deck. And then the last 2 cards of the side deck are 2 copies of Trap Stun. The fact that we can just flip this card in the standby phase to undead our Treeborn Frog. A lot of people will think, oh, they have a trap card, they can't get their Treeborn, and they might have to set Econ because they're worried. Actually, it's Trap Stun, and then we just go off next turn and kind of win the game. So let me know what you guys think of the deck. There will be tons of duels in the description because we've loved playing this deck. And if there's anything you'd like to see on the channel, just feel sure to reach out, comment, let me know what you think of the deck. Be sure to like and subscribe for more retro format content. Thanks for watching, guys.